you're watching this series of films, you most likely care about what's going on, how we're messing up our planet and negatively impacting wildlife. Perhaps you also want to help make a difference. But different people are saying different things. So who can you trust? Few listen to their government, and scientists no longer command the respect they once enjoyed. The mainstream media still has enormous influence, but it's increasingly being seen as biased, promoting a particular agenda. Social media has erupted onto the scene, but it's little more than bubbles of varying opinions which must be viewed with caution. The general public have become more and more sceptical of charities, once considered to be the good guys, with many believing that too much money is wasted on administration. These suspicions are correct, only it's a lot worse than most people think. The tiger and rhinos are symbolic species that have received a lot of publicity and attention from conservationists over many decades, with a huge amount of money subsequently donated to save these amazing animals. But there's a crucial question that nobody other than us seems to ask. Why are they still endangered after 60 years of conservation effort? So, who can you trust is the subject of this film, the third in our series of 6, in which we're arguing for a deeper approach to nature conservation. We'll also look at the related problem of myth versus reality, something else that needs sorting. As usual, I'm going to be bluntly honest with you, and we don't do waffle, hype or bullshit. Professional conservationists generally fall within 4 categories. They work for government organisations, non-government organisations, that's charities or not-for-profit foundations, businesses or academic research institutions. As I've already briefly stated, the majority of us are rightly sceptical of government, with the bulk of politicians not exactly helping to win our respect. They can and should do better. There's a lot of wastage, made worse by layer upon layer of bureaucracy. The hordes of pen pushers in the various government departments are a big part of the problem, and they usually want to do as little work as possible. That said, national parks are doing a reasonable job in most countries, achieving their objectives. Yes, we challenged the whole concept of national parks and nature reserves in our previous film, rightly so, because they're insufficient for the long term. And we saw that the biggest and most famous national park in our own country, the Lake District, in the northwest of England, is a bit of a joke. The scenery is admittedly beautiful, but the place is full of domesticated sheep, not wild animals. However, overall, worldwide, the establishment and maintenance of national parks is a definite positive. And local governments in some countries also run provincial nature reserves as well. A number of nature reserves are in private hands, run as businesses. South Africa has many examples of these. Again, they mostly deliver, conserving more land and wildlife. So that's another definite positive. Sadly, the last one. Researchers contribute almost nothing. We already have enough specific knowledge to be able to act responsibly, with hardly any exceptions. We don't need more research, at least not for now. What's needed instead is the all-important practical implementation. So academic researchers are self-serving. They take valuable funding away from other, potentially better uses. And that's a negative. Finally, what about the non-government organisations? The NGOs, charities or not-for-profit foundations? Let's begin with the accusation of excessive administration. And we can confirm that that's unfortunately true. But there's a much bigger form of wastage: staff wages. You'd be shocked by how much money is diverted into charity staff paying themselves. It accounts for the bulk of the costs. You don't need to believe me because you can see this for yourself by looking at a charity's annual accounts. They do their best to paint a rosy picture, complete with halos, but the figures are there. And if you bother to find out, it doesn't look good. It's not just the charity directors plus other high-up staff who do get paid a hell of a lot. It's the total salary bill of everyone involved that's the problem. It all rapidly adds up to a small fortune. I should make clear at this point, in case you don't already know, that with our organisation, we all purposely work as non-paid professionals. We're not volunteers because we do everything that's needed, whenever needed, with a professional approach. We just refuse to take any money for ourselves for doing what we do. It's a deliberate reaction to the ineffectiveness and inefficiency of almost all other charities. I've done this personally with Wildlife Rule for more than 20 years. Our system works, and it saves a hell of a lot of money being wasted each and every year on salaries. Money which can be far better spent than paying ourselves. The problem isn't just wastefulness and a self-serving attitude. The charities don't actually achieve much. And the little they do is usually not what's most needed. We wouldn't have such an issue with them paying themselves if they were doing a good job, achieving worthwhile goals, making significant progress. But they're not. Charities or NGOs pride themselves as having special status, free from government bureaucracy and political pressure. This is supposed to allow them the freedom to act appropriately and quickly. That's the theory. The blunt reality is very different and disappointing. Projects to educate the public are always an easy option, and they sound good. But aren't we all sufficiently educated enough already? How much more awareness do we need? What's usually missing is action, implementation. There's a lot of unfortunate empire building, flag flying and virtue signalling. Then there's the pandering to fashionable theories and solutions, something we'll be covering in the next film. Overall, charity staff lack a no-nonsense, get-it-done attitude and approach. The need for capability, as different from clever report writing, for example, is commonly overlooked. I'm sure they care about wildlife and the environment, at least to some degree, at some level, but they equally like their cushy jobs. Self-interest dominates, blinding them to what's missing in terms of practicality and delivery. Let's go back to the tiger and rhinos as a clear illustration of what's been happening and not happening. For every 100 rhinos living in the early 1970s, there was only 3 left by the end of the 20th century. A shocking decline of 97%. After these decades of abysmal conservation failure, numbers of white and black rhinos started to slightly increase for a few short years. This was largely because of the good work being done by government-run places such as Kruger National Park in South Africa and Etosha National Park in Namibia, plus a number of private reserves in South Africa. Sadly, however, poaching escalated again. When many thought the disturbing figures couldn't get any higher, they did, year after year after year, with rapidly rising numbers of deaths from the poachers' bullets. When our book, Holding On, which I referred to in our previous film, was published in 2012, we included the fact that 448 rhinos were killed in 2011, a shockingly high number. But this wasn't the end. More than 1,000 rhinos were slaughtered each year between 2013 and 2017, with a peak of 1,349 in 2015. After a slight dip, the number of rhinos being killed by poachers is going up yet again. Despite this, the same faces and organisations who make it their task to save these rhinos continue to ask for your donations. Nobody resigns in shame. There's not even an apology for failing to stop the killing. If this was a business with a similar appalling lack of success, heads would roll. There'd be uproar at anywhere near such failure. But the so-called good guys get away with an astonishing dereliction of duty, time after time. Efforts to save the tiger haven't been any better. The NGOs putting themselves forward to reverse the misfortunes of this awe-inspiring big cat have largely failed. Their miserable performance has been shambolic. They focused on the wrong things, having almost no useful impact on the tiger reserves, let alone stopping the activity of the poaching gangs. Meanwhile, the tiger's already precarious situation has got worse. Even the way that tiger populations are assessed has been a joke. Pug marks are counted as a means of calculating tiger numbers. But this methodology is badly flawed, as we've bluntly pointed out on several occasions in the past. It's grossly inaccurate, leading to convenient overestimates compared to the actual number of tigers remaining alive in the wild. Photographic evidence from camera traps, by comparison, is an accurate way of surveying a population. Individual tigers have unique stripe patterns, allowing unambiguous identification, not dissimilar to how fingerprints are used to single us out. All of this failure can be clearly attributed to a range of human weaknesses. Complacency and lousy standards have much to answer for. Then there's distraction, focusing attention on lesser considerations, aided by the wishful thinking of hope. Most people prefer to keep their heads down, not wanting to rock the proverbial boat, even when some of those in said boat are in cahoots with the poachers. It's all too easy to look the other way, taking the course of least resistance. Again, the social conditioning of monkey do what monkey see is perpetuating an already bad situation. When there's a problem that needs solving, you have to be capable of doing whatever's necessary to achieve the goal. University courses in zoology, ecology or conservation don't teach students the necessary life skills and practical know-how. And the NGOs rarely get this down to earth or real. A lot of the staff are grateful to have a paid job in conservation. Any job. There aren't many paid positions. So, when you've got one, there's a strong tendency to want to hang on to it. Many just poodle along. The notion of needing to be proactive and better than whoever's orchestrating the poaching is somewhat beyond them. Sitting at an office desk, far away from ground zero, is a doddle when what's going wrong isn't blatantly in your face and it's not you who's suffering. Bolting on a bit of caring to the usual mediocrity in society doesn't actually make you a better person. At least not with regards to being effective and efficient as a problem solver. This essential need for capability is amongst the last things that most charities consider. They're far more concerned with virtue signalling and how they're viewed. Few bother or dare to challenge their lacklustre output. We've talked with poachers and anti-poaching guards, from India and Nepal to South Africa and Namibia, and we've got decades of experience seeing how other charities are run. So I know what I'm talking about. And we're proud to be different, refusing to dumb down to the usual low levels. Our projects are successful. We don't mess about. We train team members to be capable, which isn't as easy or straightforward as it sounds, but it has to be done. And, to repeat, we don't pay ourselves, wasting enormous amounts of money. We're genuinely effective and efficient. I must also say something about those pompous international gatherings that promise much to save the planet and reverse climate change, but deliver almost next to nothing. Decade after decade after decade. They're basically a joke, little more than a flag-flying exercise, a ridiculously expensive talking shop. The initial 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro was an embarrassing fudge, which set the tone for what's followed. Of course, most of the delegates hail these events as some kind of a success, with their fake spin and fancy speeches. The UN is the mother of all flag-flying organisations, costing an absolute fortune to do almost next to nothing useful at the best of times. And the idea of getting a consensus of 197 countries to meaningfully agree on anything is naive. Instead, any lofty aim is immediately hijacked by all kinds of hidden agendas. As for the NGOs, they're viewed by the big players as a mere annoyance, a bunch of angry wasps buzzing around the rotting fruit. Although, in the spirit of inclusiveness, they're seemingly welcomed with open arms. It's all a farce, propped up by worthless words. And each one costs a large sum of money, not to mention all those naughty air miles. There's another difficulty adding to the question of who can you trust, which can be summarised as the problem of myth versus reality. Many shy away from the harshness of the actual facts of a matter, instead preferring a rose-tinted view of the situation. This is closely tied in with psychological avoidance. Propaganda and fake news is one form of this, and can now be easily circulated by anyone. Sometimes an issue is black and white, clear-cut, but usually it's not. It's more a matter of degree, of different shades of grey. So there's a lot of scope for spin, for twisting what's what. There are many reasons why an individual, or any kind of organisation, gets something wrong and veers away from the truth. Low or mediocre standards don't help, compounded by a lack of attention to detail, resulting in sloppiness. And it's easier just to trot out a soundbite that might stick in the mind. Further major complications include hidden agendas and self-interest, plus cognitive bias. Sometimes it's just a case of raw deception. Education is harder to achieve than you might think. Feeding people what they want to hear, or perhaps tapping into their anxieties and fears, is much easier, likely to prompt certain short-term responses, like giving money to a cause. Of course, this isn't really education. To be blunt, it's just emotional manipulation. People usually want to get their own way. That's one of the dominating factors. At the same time, there's also this major problem of psychological avoidance. Most can't be bothered to think too much. They've shut off, put up defensive walls, dumbed down, settle for the cowardly option of making excuses and blaming others. This makes them emotionally vulnerable to additional dodgy influences. For example, it's easier to join in and go along with the crowd, the herd, than it is to stand tall being true to yourself. Again, we're back to the social conditioning of monkey do what monkey see. The mainstream media are increasingly guilty of biased reporting and setting suspect agendas. Environmental groups and campaigners have been unreliable for a long time. It's become increasingly hard to know who the good guys really are. You can easily be fooled and pulled in by nice-sounding words. This mess of unreliable opinions clearly showed up throughout the many years of talking about reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone National Park. There was the inevitable opposition from local ranchers and politicians who labelled the wolf as the Saddam Hussein of the animal world. As you might remember from our previous film, even the National Park Service once considered these predators to be vermin. At the other extreme, you had some supporters claiming that wolves are our spiritual brothers and sisters, that they possess special awareness and other supernatural powers, and that they could do no wrong. This silliness equally didn't help. Here in the UK, groups of people were fond of attributing similar spiritual qualities to dolphins, ignoring the fact that marine biologists know that gang rape is part of dolphin behaviour, something that's been filmed again and again. Commonly, hope and myth make comfortable bedfellows. It's the soft option, but it doesn't achieve anything worthwhile. Chief Seattle's inspirational speech has become legendary, repeated by greenies decade after decade. What is man without the beasts? If all the beasts were gone, man would die from a great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beasts soon happens to man. All things are connected. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. But this inspirational speech is fictional. It's just a myth. It never happened. Yes, there was a real Chief Seattle, but the words came from a scriptwriter called Ted Perry for a 1971 film. Part of the speech is historically wrong. For example, I have seen 1,000 rotting buffaloes on the prairies left by the white man who shot them from a passing train. There were no buffalo anywhere near the chief's tribal homeland. He lived 1,000 miles away from the prairies. And Chief Seattle's days were before the Union and Central Pacific Railroads had been built. Ted Perry later admitted his ignorance and showed regret for writing the fictional speech. But the myth had begun. And afterwards, lots of people perpetuated the romantic hype. This included the US Vice President, Al Gore, but also many good people jumped on the bandwagon, such as the singer-songwriter Dan Fogelberg. I'm a big fan of Dan's music. The fictional words of Chief Seattle were quoted on the sleeve notes of one of his albums. Few people, by comparison, are interested in the actual reality. Yet facing reality is an essential key factor for being the best you can be. This next example illustrates how easy it is for activists to con people. The events I'm about to describe happened a number of years ago, but the lessons to be learned are as relevant today as ever. In 1995, Greenpeace campaigned against the deep water disposal of the Brent Spar. New pipeline technology had rendered the Brent Spar obsolete, which had acted as a giant floating oil storage and loading buoy. Professional experts and scientific institutes had concluded the best option was to sink it in the deep ocean, minimising environmental and human safety risks. That was until Greenpeace started whipping up public opinion. Greenpeace claimed that Shell, who owned the Brent Spar, were going to dump 14,500 tonnes of toxic litter in the North Sea. Adverts placed in national newspapers had the added slogan, "You can be sure of Greenpeace." Independent marine biologists objected to Greenpeace's emotive propaganda, making their views clear on TV, radio and in the newspapers, insisting there was negligible danger to deep-sea life, supporting official plans already approved. But the British public supported Greenpeace, the good guys, 10-1 according to polls. On mainland Europe, emotions had also been stirred up, and boycotts of Shell garages encouraged. Subsequently, 50 of Shell's service stations were damaged, including 2 firebombings, and one was shot at by persons unknown. With all this happening, just as Greenpeace were expecting imminent defeat, Shell headquarters in Europe decided to abort the operation, much to the dismay of Shell UK. Within 2 months, UK television executives admitted to a lack of objectivity in their coverage of the story as it unfolded. They'd used, for example, footage supplied and filmed by Greenpeace that blatantly misrepresented the facts. Evidence emerged that clearly showed Greenpeace stage managing events using video and still photography, portraying a distorted impression of what had actually happened. In one instance, Greenpeace made it look like their inflatable dinghy had been rammed by a Shell boat, whereas the truth was that the Shell crew were rescuing the activists, who'd been tricked by Greenpeace into believing the inflatable was in trouble. Greenpeace were also proved to be spectacularly wrong about the claims of the Brent Spar's toxicity. The 14,500 tonnes figure was actually the total weight of the installation, mostly made up of clean steel and ballast. Greenpeace had claimed it contained 5,000 tonnes of oil. It didn't. There was almost none, and Greenpeace were forced into a climb down. They had to concede that the toxicity argument had been wrong. But then, in the very next breath, they instead began arguing that Shell shouldn't be littering the seas. And with this sudden change of tack, they were blatant hypocrites. That is, to anyone with a memory. 10 years earlier, Greenpeace's Rainbow Warrior had been sabotaged in Auckland Harbour by French secret agents. The incident got a lot of media attention, and their membership significantly increased. A number of activists wanted to repair the ship, but the organisation's top people decided to re-sink her off the New Zealand coast, with the world's media in attendance, generating even more publicity, and then buy a new ship. A decade later, now complaining about sinking the Brent Spar, Greenpeace relied on forgetfulness and a lack of thinking, ignoring recent history that it was okay for them to litter the seas when they wanted to. You must always be aware that facts are likely to be distorted to suit one particular agenda or another. On top of that, confirmation bias is a known psychological factor that plagues most people, whether they recognise it or not. Negative emotion likewise gets in the way of critical thinking skills. In recent years, we've all seen an angry girl, now a young woman, criticise everyone under the sun for failing to do the right things to stop climate change. She talks and talks and talks. But what does she actually do? And why don't more people see the psychological dysfunction that clearly shows up on her face, that her own father has said she's suffered from for years? Is it because almost everyone displaces their emotional angst onto someone or something else, one way or another? Yes, governments and others are dragging their heels. We all knew that long ago. But is this really the type of lead campaigner that we need? Psychological avoidance has to be better recognised and more fully understood, because a high level of deflection is at the centre of all this distortion. The failure to identify and rectify this weakness is hurting everyone and everything. We'll be saying a lot more about this in the film after next, because it's part of the biggest problem of all. Meanwhile, how can you work out who to trust? I can give you a few quick tips, but this isn't something that can be properly taught at the end of a YouTube film. First, be wary of celebrities or others who actually know very little and who have next to no practical experience. Yes, they might appeal to you in some way, but consider they've probably jumped on the bandwagon. They might be well-meaning, perhaps, but there are better sources to turn to. Someone who's been there and walked the walk for a very long time, steeped in practicality, should be more reliable. But still, what's their agenda? Hidden agendas aren't always obvious because they're hidden. Wanting to uphold a strong self-image is a powerful motivation that can dominate, with humility frequently nowhere to be seen. And that's just one common example of what can get in the way of adherence to the facts. There must instead be trustworthiness. Ask yourself simple probing questions about who or what you're watching, hearing or reading. Look for inconsistencies, contradictions and hypocrisy. Be aware that practice makes perfect, so don't be fooled by polished turds, whether they're politicians, newsreaders or environmental campaigners. Look beyond the mask to see if the projection of ostensible sincerity is really genuine. To do this, you'll need to build up a reliable picture or framework of understanding human behaviour. We say a lot more about this in our films that focus on psychology. OK, that's enough for now. Next, we'll be examining tokenism, fashionable solutions, and going on protests or signing petitions. I'll see you again soon.